I'm keeping my name anonymous for privacy reasons, but this happened just 5 years ago. At the time, I was traveling around with my dog, Rocky. I know, not the most unique name, but I named him after the mountain range. I found him stray 3 years prior. He was a medium-sized Australian Shepherd mix, and the vet said he was between 6 to 7 years old when I found him. There was no information on him whatsoever, and after weeks of being unsuccessful in finding his owners, I made the decision to adopt him. He became sort of my adventure buddy, going on hikes and backpacking trips year-round, and we both loved it. The trip this happened on was honestly nothing crazy. It was just supposed to be a one-day in, one-day out backpack along a firebreak trail to a retired lookout tower. I really couldn't find too much info on the place, at least not up-to-date info. Best I could find were some really old rules about it being a non-rentable, first-come, first-served public rest shelter with a 3-night limit. But like I said, that info was super outdated. I didn't care too much to do any more research than that because I wasn't even planning to stay the night in the tower. The idea was to reach the ridge, take a look around, and hike another few miles down to a creek with a small tent campsite. However, this whole idea fell through when me and Rocky were about 30 minutes out from the tower and dark, heavy clouds started rolling overhead. We rushed to the tower, and with a view of the valley from the ledge, I could see a really bad rain and thunderstorm hitting the mountain directly across from us. It looked like it was headed our way. I didn't mind so much camping in my tent during a storm, but the problem was that I didn't know if we could make it to the campsite and set up before the storm hit. After a couple minutes of thinking, the decision was made for me by the sudden onset of rain downpouring on the lookout tower. So I decided to hunker down inside the tower with Rocky, at least to let the storm pass. It was then that I got a really good look at the place. It was mostly what I expected. White paint thinning on the walls, a rusted stove built into the corner, and aside from that, completely empty. Not even a trashy old mattress that most public forest shelters usually have. Within minutes, the storm hit twice as hard. Rain was coming down so heavy I couldn't even see the forest past the windows, and I could feel the wind cutting inside between the gaps in the wood. The tower had a bit of give to it as well, swaying a bit every time a gust of wind would hit it, and it didn't look like it was slowing down anytime soon. I laid out my sleeping bag to make a more comfortable rest area, then took out my dinner stuff and made a little freeze-dried meal. Rocky was pretty shaken by the storm, though. He wouldn't settle, pacing near the door with his tail tucked and quietly whining. He never liked storms, but this one definitely made him feel worse than usual. Thought it was probably the movement of the tower, or maybe even the heights. I called him over and had him sit next to me so I could pet him to quiet him down and get him to relax a little. But when it was just the sound of the rain drumming on the roof, I heard something else. It was a faint, hollow thunk sound, like something metal shifting beneath the floor. It was subtle enough to blend in with the rain and only noticeable during short periods where the rain would slow down a bit. After a minute or two, though, I couldn't hear it anymore. Or maybe my mind drowned it out. I'm not really sure. Eventually, I laid down, and Rocky burrowed in the sleeping bag with me. The rain and thunder started to feel comforting, I guess, and I fell asleep. Next thing I knew, I woke up and checked my watch, seeing it was just past 2 a.m., and right away, something was missing. The noise of rain and everything. It was just silent. I sat up, realizing Rocky wasn't in my sleeping bag anymore. He was over by the door, giving me that look like he needed to go out and quietly whining again. I took a moment, then got up and put my shoes on and grabbed the flashlight. I opened the door and stepped outside with him, walking down the creaky steps and letting him roam the field between the tower and the forest. After the hours of heavy rain, the dead silence of the forest now was kind of unsettling. I stayed near the tower, just keeping my flashlight on Rocky as he did his business. But then I heard the slightest sound behind me, a thin metal squeak from a small wind gust. I turned around and pointed my flashlight under the lookout tower, immediately spotting what looked like a metal cellar door, like one of those underground ones that old houses sometimes have. I figured this one must have been for storage back when the tower was in use, maybe for keeping dry firewood and tools or something. But then I remembered the sounds I heard overnight, the metal thump sounds, and honestly, something in my gut knew the moment I saw those cellar doors that those sounds had to be from the cellar doors opening and closing, or maybe even something moving around inside the cellar. I kept the flashlight on it and approached it, then slowly lifted one of the doors and peeked inside. There were maybe 5 or 6 steps. It didn't go down very far, and on the stairs, there were fresh wet spots of mud going up every step. But after looking at it for just a moment, Rocky suddenly barked. It was just one sharp, terrified bark. I dropped the door closed and spun around just quick enough to see something shift in the tree line just past Rocky. I immediately called him back, then ran up the stairs and inside the tower. Thankfully, I'd only unpacked my sleeping bag, so I quickly rolled it up and clipped it to my backpack. Someone was out there watching us, and I was not staying to find out why. I made Rocky stay close, and we quickly exited the tower and got back down to the base. I instinctively turned around and shined the flashlight back under the tower at the cellar. The doors were open. Then I looked down at Rocky. His eyes stared at the cellar intensely, clearly scared of whatever was in there. We hurried away, getting right back onto the firebreak trail. We pretty much ran for a whole mile before the rain started pouring down again. So we took it easy and eventually made it back. I called the Forest Service that morning, and it only made me more terrified of what could have happened. The ranger said that the lookout tower I mentioned was not in service and off-limits to the public. I couldn't get him to spill any specifics, but from the little hints I felt like I got, it sounded like some things had been happening in that area that caused them to just stop allowing people to use the tower. That's why I couldn't find any information on it. I think there's a lot of possible explanations for what happened out there, but none of them make me feel any better. The most harmless explanation is someone was living in the cellar of the retired tower for who knows how long. But even then, why did they leave in the middle of the night? And why were they watching us from the trees? It's been a while, so I've mostly come to terms with not having any answers. But I think the chances are slim that if I hadn't have left, nothing else would have happened. Keep listening, because the most terrifying part isn't what was found in that cellar. It's what was waiting silently in the trees. Subscribe to Nightling, like the video, and comment. They found a place that wasn't meant to be found. No trails, no records, just coordinates and a message waiting inside. Hope you're happy. This was in 2019. Me and my buddy Jackson have a hobby for exploring abandoned places. I guess we were urban explorers, but we weren't really the type to do anything too illegal, or at least nothing too risky, which usually meant finding places further out from the city and in more remote areas. For this one, Jackson and I had found a small Reddit thread of a fire lookout tower posted in the community for abandoned places in our state. The OP didn't mention where it was, though, and seemed like he was trying to keep it from being too available to everyone online. I tried my luck at messaging him directly, and although he was hesitant, I eventually was able to get the coordinates from him. so long as I didn't pass it around to everyone else and ruin the spot. We packed up and headed out there on a Monday morning. Getting there was a bit sketchy. No trails really, and no clear sight lines of where we were headed. Just had to trust the GPS. The woods also had this really strange feeling. If Jackson wasn't there with me, I 100% would have booked it out of there and never looked back just from the feeling alone. Jackson also said he felt off, but we still continued walking. All the way up until just about a minute from the fire lookout, there were no signs whatsoever that we were even remotely in the right place or going in the right direction. No signs of trails, footpaths, or views of the structure. Nothing. It wasn't until we were literally 30 FT from it that we even saw it for the first time. We reached a clearing in the trees, and on the hill was, well, the lookout tower. It wasn't exactly the kind we were hoping for, but I was just happy it existed and the GPS got us there. This one wasn't sitting on tall stilts. It was basically just a cabin on top of the hill with a view over the forest. Jackson knocked on the door, then opened it. We stepped in. The inside was dark, even though windows surrounded pretty much all sides. The fog and grime prevented pretty much any light from coming in. There was also a bunch of junk scattered on the floor. But eerily, there was a piece of paper taped to the far wall. It was noticeably out of place, being clean and new from someone recently. On it were 3 words. Hope you're happy. Anyway, the sun was getting low, so I shut the door and we settled in for the night. I got out the camping stove and started boiling water to make ramen for dinner. Strangely, that whole night felt off. We didn't really talk for a while. Eventually, when it got later, we both got in our sleeping bags and fell asleep. When I woke up, I remember opening my eyes to the pitch-black room and hearing just the slight creaks of the cabin, but something felt like it was missing, and that's when I rolled over and looked at Jackson's empty sleeping bag. After I said his name again, there was a sudden thud against the wood. Then again. I tilted my head up and looked at the roof. Slow, quiet thuds moved across the ceiling. Then suddenly the door opened and Jackson stepped inside, nearly giving me a heart attack. He looked surprised to see me awake, but I told him to shush before he said anything. But whatever the hell I'd been hearing had stopped. Next day, things still felt a little off there. We spent most of the day exploring around the area, walking around and looking for anything else cool, but there really wasn't anything. The forest seemed to be the same half-dead trees for miles and miles and miles. Around sundown again, we got back to the lookout tower. Standing maybe 40 FT from the cabin, right on the line between the clearing and the trees, there was a man. His eyes were dead, and he had a dreadful, empty look. Slowly, he turned and walked straight into the woods. During our conversation, a faint shadow suddenly moved across Jackson's face. I quickly turned around and looked at the window behind me. Could barely see anything through it, but there was a shape moving along the outer wall. My heart was racing. There was a long pause, then 3 soft knocks against the door. Jackson immediately got up and slammed the bolt lock down. Another pause, then 3 loud, heavy hits shook the door. Neither of us moved. We were frozen, just completely horrified. When the sun came up, we booked it out of the cabin. The whole way back through the woods was just unsettling and eerie, like we were being watched. When we made it out, the first thing I did was check on Reddit, but the post was removed and the account was deleted. Jackson and I are still great friends and still explore abandoned places. We've had other encounters, but none like this one. Both of us are still genuinely freaked out about what happened during those 2 nights. If you believe some places are abandoned for a reason, stay until the end, because what followed us out of those woods never stopped watching. Subscribe to Nightling, like the video, and comment.